Hey witches, how you doing today? We are back with another video, and I'm pretty excited about this one. This is something I've been thinking about a lot, and basically we see a lot of people coming into witchcraft and paganism from a Christian or a Christian adjacent background, and they don't even realize the Christian influence that they're still under. And they're practicing paganism, but in a very Christian way. And I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like today. Before we get started, I'll introduce myself. For those of you who are new around here, my name is Taya. Welcome to the channel. We talk about all sorts of things witchcraft. And for those of you who are returning viewers, maybe coming in from another video, welcome back. Thank you so much for the support. I really appreciate it. And all of you, please consider subscribing. It's a really great way to help us build the channel. All right, a few things we need to clear up before we kind of get into the goodness. First of all, not all witches are pagans. And sometimes I see people use this term very interchangeably, like I'm a witch, I'm a pagan, they're pagan, they're witch, but not all witches are pagans. Witchcraft and religion are separate. Witchcraft is a practice into which you might choose to incorporate your religion. So you can be pagan, yes, but you can be atheist, you can be Christian, you can be Buddhist. And today I am speaking to the pagan witches. So if you are a Christian witch, yes, of course your practice is going to be influenced by Christianity. That's what you want. I'm talking to the pagan witches who think that they're so far outside Christianity and yet have this very Christian outlook on paganism. Now, not all pagans are witches. Fair enough. So let's go to Wikipedia and get a little quick rundown on paganism. So, pagan is a term first used in the 4th century by early Christians for people in the Roman Empire who practiced polytheism or ethnic religions other than Judaism. So you had Christians, you had Jews, and you had pagans. Now, sometime later, after the Middle Ages, paganism came to refer to any non-Christian religion, and it was a term that presumed a belief in false gods, right? So in these two, you see it's a very pejorative, like pagan, yeah, no, right? It's not what we're doing. Now, in modern times, paganism has become a self-applied description for modern paganism, neo-pagan movements, and polytheistic reconstructionists. So now we are choosing to reclaim the word pagan and say, yeah, you know what, that is what I am. Kind of similar to the reclaiming of the word witch, which used to be very pejorative and is now what we do. So as you can see, paganism is a really broad term that incorporates beliefs or practices, such as nature worship, that are different from those in the largest world religions. Now, the third thing that we need to understand is the all-encompassing Christian influence. Now, obviously, Christianity influences actual Christians, people who were raised in Christianity, like myself, right? I was raised Roman Catholic. Obviously, I'm a very Christian influenced. But there are also those who were raised without specific religion in Christian-influenced countries, and specifically, I am talking about the US and Canada. I can't really speak to any other country, but I'm sure it's quite prevalent in Europe as well. But US and Canada, that's my lived experience. And in these countries where Christian religious ideals seep into our systems of schools, governments, and media, and we might not consider ourselves Christian per se, but it heavily influences our outlook. I look at my children. They have been raised without religion, and yet my son asked me a question about God the other day, right? He believes in God. Well, where did he get that from? It wasn't from me or my husband. It wasn't from his sister, right? And in fact, he goes to school with predominantly Muslim children, right? He's in the public school system here in Edmonton, and it's like on our side of the city, it's right. He's one of very few Caucasian kids in his class, but yet here he is questioning about God, which is fine, but it crops up right in our schools, in our governments, in our media. And we need to You need to realize that even if you weren't necessarily raised Christian, you have been heavily influenced in these areas, in Canada and the US, by the Christian ideals. So, all that being said, let's get to the good stuff. How might Christianity still be influencing your pagan practice? So the biggest way you see it sort of pop up is this deity worship. The praying to and worshiping of deities. The idea that deities are omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent, right? That the gods are all-knowing, all-powerful, and always present. That is a very Christian view of deity. Pagan gods and goddesses of old were not necessarily viewed this way. They were somewhat removed from daily life, and they were seasonal, right? The gods and goddesses you might interact with in the middle of winter were very different from the ones that would present themselves in the summer. Deity was seen as fallible and had almost human-like characteristics, right? You see the pagan gods, they were not all powerful. They were seen, a lot of them were very fallible. They made mistakes. They had very human foibles. And one might petition a god for intervention or favor, but it was transactional, not worshipful, right? It was about, hey, if you do this, I'll do this for you, versus, please, I worship you, please, can you intervene on my behalf? It was very transactional. Okay, so that's deity worship. The second way you see this show up, and it's also a big one, is the right way, right? In Christianity, there is a heavy emphasis on the right way to be a Christian. Sins are clearly outlined. Behavioral expectations are clearly defined. You go to church at least one time per week, and that's on Sunday. You pray on your knees. Adultery is a sin. Right? You are rewarded for right behavior in Christianity. You are rewarded with God's favor and eventually with admission to heaven. You, in turn, are punished for wrong behavior with God's disfavor, and if you keep it up, you're going to hell. Paganism doesn't necessarily have this link to morals and rules for life. There is no single defined right path in paganism. It has a much more diverse and flexible system in that it's polytheistic, it works with multiple deities, and it gives you a lot of room. Something that maybe you're looking at a Celtic pantheon that Bridget might not necessarily be comfortable or in her wheelhouse is in the wheelhouse of the Morrigan, right? So there's not just one way to be. You had these multiple examples, so it gives you a lot of wiggle room on your morals and values. And then this idea of a right path leads us to virtue signaling. And basically that is the need to be seen practicing the right way. Right? Being seen at church, being seen doing public good works, being seen wearing my crucifix and dressing modestly, right? Look what a good Christian I am. And you basically can't be considered a good, righteous Christian if you aren't seen publicly performing. There is a presumption of failing in Christianity. There's a presumption that you are not doing it right unless you are proving that you are doing it right. Now, new pagans sort of fall into this need, right? Right away, they want to virtue signal. They want to show how good they are. And often you'll see that new person and they're kind of running their mouth off about, well, I do this and I do that and I do this and I do that. And it's like, some of us who've been around for a while are like, I don't really care. Why are you telling me this? It's virtue signaling, right? And that's a very Christian concept. Paganism doesn't have this need for this legitimacy with your relationship with your gods. That relationship is personal and private, and it's full of unverified personal gnosis. And I think there's definitely this presumption of succeeding. Like, great, you work with such and such a deity. That's awesome. I just assume that that's all good. I don't assume that you're failing unless you prove otherwise. But you very often see people, and sometimes people who have been around in the pagan community a really long time, who like to profess the right way, and they do this virtue signaling about, well, I do X, Y, and Z. Are you doing X, Y, and Z? And it's a very Christian outlook. And the final one this brings me to is individualism versus community-based relationships. So Christianity is about you getting right with God. It's one-on-one, you getting right with God. And in the old days of paganism, it was about the community acting in accordance with the will of the gods. In modern times, it's very much about individual success, right? And that works with the Christian one-on-one model. And I say individual success because if we fail in this world, if my husband loses his job and we end up homeless, does that affect my neighbors in any way? No, I mean, they'd probably be sad for us, I hope. But at the end of the day, that has no effect on them. Somebody else will buy this house and move in, and then the community will proceed as always. But back in the day, the communities survived as a group, and you couldn't survive alone. If your neighbor failed, it directly impacted you. You had to function as a group. Now, functioning today as a pagan in this modern individual success world, it's very different from what it used to be. And we're left to our own devices. And it's easy to fall back into a very Christian-influenced type of paganism. Again, because that model works one-on-one with God, we kind of take that model and apply it to our paganism. But that isn't really how paganism was, or, you know, back in the day, how paganism was worked. It was a community-based model. And again, that presumption of failing versus the presumption of succeeding. You know, and our relationships with our gods being personal and private and full of unverified personal gnosis. And so sometimes it's not always easy to work paganism in today's modern world because it wasn't necessarily designed or set up, or it wasn't developed in this modern world. It's a throwback to old community-based times. So I guess all that being said, I would encourage you to really look at your pagan practice, and are you following the virtues of old, or are you operating under Christian influence? I think it's a lot more prevalent than a lot of us would be comfortable admitting. So I'm curious, what's your experience with that? Leave us a comment. I'd love to get that discussion started. And otherwise, yeah, that's our video for today. Thank you so much for hanging out. And yeah, we'll catch you in the next one. Mwah. Thanks so much, you guys.